What about intuition versus anxiety, and how can you tell the difference? So as we kind of talked about when I was explaining, our continuum, and that impulses to reach for or move away are ways of managing what we perceive to be attachment threats in the nervous system and limbic brain, right? So what is intuition? So intuition, this is where it gets a little tricky, because intuition is intuited often through the body as well, right? And so this is where developing an emotional vocabulary is supremely important, because how do we develop an emotional vocabulary in the first place? Well, what happens is when you're young, very young, you have a sensation in your body. There's energy that is moving through your body, right? And when you're an infant or a toddler or very young, what happens is you don't have the words for that. So what you experience is a charge of energy. There's a sensation, there's a charge of energy in your body, it's a drive, it's been expressed in such a way, and it makes your body leak tears. It makes a crampy sense, feeling in your stomach. Whatever it is, there's a sensation, a charge that lights up your body. And what do? You cry, you yell, you grunt, you groan, right? And because you're trying to release that energy, you're expressing that energy, and then someone around you interprets that expression as a need for something. So mom says, "Oh, you're upset? Are you hungry? Do you want this?" And the body doesn't experience in relief in that offering. So you keep crying. No, that's not it. "Oh, do you want this? Do you want your binky? Do you want your toy?" So you hand the toy. And the body doesn't feel relief in that either, so you just keep crying, right? And then you say, "Oh, you want your blanket? Do you want your blanket?" And you pick the baby up and you wrap the baby in the blanket. And all of a sudden there's this sense of relief. The energy is discharged, right? That sensation shifts. Oh, that sensation means I want my binky, my blanket. I want to be held. I want to be compressed. And now I know, right? Okay, so what happens is, that's a very basic example, but what happens is over the course of development, tons of those little experiences get layered on top of each other, and as you start to sift and sort, and those things are co-regulated or mirrored back to you by a good enough parent or caretaker who can sense these things because they had a good enough parent or person who taught them how to do it, right? That now what happens is you are layering these experiences on top of each other, and you are now understanding the subtleties of when you experience a charge of sensation in your body. Now what happens is most people say, "I feel anxious," and anxious becomes this blanket term for a myriad of more subtle emotions that are going on beneath the surface. But because you don't have the language, or you haven't had the mirroring experience to teach you that you can be happy and sad at the same time, that excitement could also be anxiety, that, well, I'm excited, but I'm also a little nervous. I'm anticipatory, but I'm also a little doubtful. I want to do it, but I'm afraid I'll fail, right? All those things, all those more subtle emotions get layered on top of each other. And for someone who never had that, like who never showed you how to organize things, utilize the body's resources as the first organizer of experience, and assign a mental thought, abstract thought concept to it, a symbol first, and then a word, right? If no one taught you how to do that, what's going to happen is you're going to experience that charge, and you're going to say, "I'm in survival mode. I'm anxious. I'm overwhelmed. I'm stressed. I can't deal with this." And then what happens? We label that whole thing. Whatever person, place, or thing stimulated that charge, we label all of it bad. Bad, no. Right? And this is kind of like what we were just talking about. This happens often for someone who's more disorganized because they probably got the least amount of support with this. But that's what happens. And so this is what leads to what we call splitting and black and white thinking. Right? Because we don't have the language. We're not able to sense the subtleties. So it can be very difficult to access intuition when you don't have that language, because you're not able to pick apart the subtleties, right? If you could imagine, maybe people yell in excitement and joy, and people yell out of anger and frustration. How do you know the difference? Actually, If you could just give me a little comment there, I'll ask that question. How do you know the difference? How do you know the difference between when someone's yelling out of frustration and anger versus when someone's yelling out of excitement? How do you know? Right? So, I mean, and what if, okay, maybe you know in your own language, what about in someone else's language? Right? What if, imagine like, what if I lived above a sports bar in Manhattan for a long time. And imagine like if you were unfamiliar with the culture and you were unfamiliar with tone of voice, right? Maybe tone of voice, facial expression, a smile, body language. What happens if you go to another culture and the way they express their language, their tone of voice, their facial expressions, their body posture is different in communication than it is in yours? You might misinterpret that, right? Or maybe you're so attuned to and sensitive to everything else but verbal language, you're still able to receive that. But there are nuances, there are subtleties, and there are nuances, right? So this is kind of like what the question is asking. We become curious, we become investigators, we become inquirers, right? So how do I know if I am in survival mode or if I am accessing my intuition? So I wanted to kind of lay that as a foundation for helping you to kind of conceptualize, well, first developing a more adequate emotional vocabulary for the subtleties of experience, understanding that your intuition will emerge in your experience as a form of energetic charge. Emotions are just one effective way for interpreting that, but it may also be a physical sensation. You can get intuition through clairvoyance, clairaudience, a physical sensation in your body, a sudden emotional feeling that you don't know. It may not necessarily feel like it's yours, right? But there are some qualities to the thoughts that you might be thinking when you're receiving intuition versus a sort of jolt of attachment anxiety, and I want to offer those to you now. So here are 8 questions that might describe when you're feeling a jolt of attachment anxiety. So number 1, does it feel urgent? Right? Is there a sense of urgency around what you're thinking and feeling? Number 2, are you comparing something to something better? Meaning, are you expressing criticism or judgment and trying to measure something up to some other standard other than what it is, right? You're not accepting something for what it is. Number 3, does whatever you are considering feel like your only chance in the world? In other words, is there a sense of scarcity around it, right? This is my one and only opportunity. Anybody see the Super Bowl halftime show? Eminem comes up and he's got that song, "You only got one chance, do not miss your shot," right? Not, and I just had to laugh because it's like, of course, there's a million gazillion chances. There's never only one shot. Okay. The next question would be, does it have to be right or wrong, right? So is there that splitting going on? Is it either right or wrong, good or bad, in or out, right? And that's what happens when we don't have that emotional vocabulary. We don't have a sense of those subtleties of the gray areas, okay? Are you afraid of what others are going to think? Is there a degree of imposter syndrome or shame around it? Are you preoccupied with presentation above substance, right? Quantity above quality, right? Another question would be, it's a question, I think it's number 6. Will it help you avoid a negative consequence? So are you wanting something to avoid something else, right? Are you wanting something to provide relief or stopgap something you think is missing, right? That comes from a place of scarcity and lack, okay? Number 7, whatever it is, are you trying to control it? Especially something that you do not fundamentally have control over. Are you trying to foster, adopt, or cling to the illusion of control? And the 8th question would be, is your self-esteem tied up in it? Do you feel like this thing is going to either affirm or validate your sense of self-worth and value? Okay, these are all signs that there may be an attachment, anxiety, survival mode, ego-based quality to this. Okay, so what's the other side of that? All right, so what's the opposite of all of that? Well, the opposite might be Are you relaxed when you think about it? Do you feel more accepting of what it is or the circumstance for what it is? Is there a compassionate orientation towards it? Do you trust that there are many opportunities, right? That this is just one of many? Can you consider all sides of it to be as valid as your own perspective, right? Is everything or all parties involved, are they all equally valid in your eyes? Does your instinct, do your instincts or your thoughts or your opinions, do you feel that it matters more than other people's opinions? You're willing to listen to what they have to say, but do you still have the final word on the matter? Or are you still bending to what other people say and think that they're smarter than you, they know better than you, right? Will it add something positive to your life? So instead of looking for a stopgap or looking for relief, are you trying to add to something that's already full? Is it stemming from curiosity? Is it stemming from a place that is expansive, not compensatory? Okay. Can you let it flow and unfold, or are you trying to control it, right? So is it okay to let it kind of flow and unfold for you? And lastly, do you trust that you are worthy with or without this thing, with or without the success of some endeavor, with or without this specific partner, right? Do you realize that your inherent value and validity is not tied up in this thing and never could be? Okay. In that case, I would say that intuition is speaking to you. Okay. Okay. So I hope that helps to answer that question.